Our next set of speakers are industry veterans who will address some of our burning questions around advertising in this new world. What will it really look like? What are the things to be cognizant of? What are consumer behavior going to be? What should brand behavior be? When will all this get over? So to address all these burning questions, I'd like to welcome Babita Barua, who is the managing partner at GTB. GTB is part of the WPP group. Sumit Singh, Chief Marketing Officer, InfoEdge, and she leads brands like Naukri.com, Jeevansathi.com, 99 Acres, and many more. Soumya Mohanty, the Managing Director and Chief Client Officer at Kantar Insights. And moderating the session will be Siddharth Puri, CEO and co-founder of Tyru Technologies. A very warm welcome to all of you here. Are we all here? Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Siddharth, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Shiny, and thanks, Harish. I think so. The last session was very, very informative. It really was inspiring to hear stories from Tata's evolution. I think so. That's a great company we all look up to, and the amount of work as a brand they have done, and for the larger community. And I think so. Now, starting out this particular panel, expanding on what Shiny really spoke about. Shiny, definitely we don't have any oracle or anything which gives us outlook of the future. But me and my esteemed panelists, I'm sure will be able to add our 2 cents from our experience and also the data points which each of us are tracking in our respective businesses and hoping that the larger audiences and participants are able to benefit from that. Just again to bring the locus back to the question, how we're going to be talking about this panel is that we all understand, right, that, what are the main questions which are challenging marketers and businesses, which are mostly around how do we address the new normal. Most importantly, I think so, the challenge in addressing the new normal is not about where are we going, but also assessing where do we stand today. I think so those 2 things are equally important. We'll try to keep this panel more from an advertising perspective. And impact in lines over the next 4 to 6 quarters and how marketers and brands should look out about it. So before we start, I'll just request our panelists to quickly introduce themselves before we dive in. Just to give a small intro about myself, I'm Siddharth, I'm co-founder of Tyru Technologies. We are market entry partner for global internet companies. We help large internet companies to build out commercial operations and markets in emerging markets in Asia. Babita?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Babita Barua. I lead the India team for WPP's OPCO, GTB, Global Team Blue. We are a full service agency. But before I go further into just a 2-line introduction, I must wish everybody here a happy festive day for most of you. It's Bihu for us in Assam, so have a great day today. I've been in advertising now and communications now for 24 years with the WPP group, and it's a great pleasure, Shiny, and all my panelists to be here today. Like Siddharth, it was a fantastic session, Harish, fantastic hearing from you stories from the Tata Group. Thank you.
Thanks, Sumit.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sumit Singh, and I lead marketing for InfoEdge. We have all internet brands like Naukri, Jeevansathi, Shiksha, 99 Acres, and recruitment brands in the Gulf called Naukri Gulf. We're India's largest internet company and the first to be listed in India. It's a great pleasure being here, and a big congratulations, I would say, to adtech, to Jaswan, Shiny, and the team to actually put this together, because it's not very easy. It's really nice to be interacting with everyone here and my fellow panelists as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumit.
Great. Soumya?
Yeah, hi, I'm Soumya, and I work for Kantar, which is one of the world's largest insights and data consultancy company. I have been in the consumer insights market research world for the last 25 odd years now. So very exciting time for me, given the way consumer behavior is unfolding right now. It's like sort of a dream come true. The whole world has become a laboratory. So it's interesting times, and excellent session by Mr. Bhatt. I mean, it was like inspirational to hear that. And hopefully one day when we are all in normal world, some of this can again come to play. Thank you.
Great. Shiny, can you put out the presentation, please? So while Shiny pulls up the presentation at the back and we dive into the panel, Soumya, we'd like to start with you, keeping in mind your rich experience, running Kantar and real life insights you're tracking across various markets. With all these consumer sentiments which are changing, right, and people are still trying to come with terms. Our Prime Minister was just on the air an hour back talking about things we should be doing, things we should not be doing. Industry and businesses are still trying to figure out, how does that individually impact them, while consumers are still thinking what should be their response, etc. How do you see these consumer sentiments with this changing era, both from a short-term perspective, right? What we're seeing in the country right now, from over the next 90 to 100 days, how do we see this changing? And how do you look at, I would say, I think so definition of midterm is changed, look from a more 90 days to a year time horizon. How do we see, the post-lockdown era, I will not call post-COVID era, how do you see these sentiments changing into more of a behavioral changes?
Sure. So it's actually a very dynamic time. And as you said, we have been tracking consumer sentiment across the world. In fact, we do this thing called COVID barometer, which is running in some 50 odd countries. When we started it, I don't think we thought we will need it beyond 2 weeks. Right. And as it has gone on, the lockdown, the changes have simply become manifold. So what we are finding is Indians are really anxious. They were very anxious, more than almost all other countries where we are doing this tracking, even before we had hit anywhere close to any other country in terms of the number of cases reported. So to start with, we had a very heightened anxiety level, unlike a UK or a US, which were taking it very cool at some point. And our anxiety was more around the fact that our life is going to get disrupted rather than around health. That's an interesting thing, but that's something we find across the world. It's more disruption rather than concern about health. And so that I think I have a slide that sort of puts it out. Yeah. So if you think in terms of disruption as a business and how to handle disruption, this challenge will probably become more manageable than in terms of how to handle a disease, because that's something that businesses don't really know how to do. So that's the bigger sentiment, I would say. Within that, there are 5 broad trends that we are finding. Now, some of those trends may be short-term. Some of those trends are probably likely to stay even as we go along. One is the sense of solidarity as one big trend. And that's very, very India-specific, that, we are all in it together. And how do we fight this war together? The second is a respect for essentials. So the Maslow's hierarchy has been flipped. It's all about staples, hygiene, things like luxury is way, it's just not in the horizon right now. The third is the omni-channel experience. A lot of people are buying for the first time online, and that creates a new ecosystem to start with. The fourth is we are looking for at-home escapes. And the final is brands that evoke trust. So these are the trends that we are seeing. They have positive and negative implication. On the positive side, respect for essentials will mean sustainability. On the negative side, it could mean holding back of aspiration and consumption, and therefore delaying recovery. So we have to see how that plays out. If I was to compare India with China, and I don't know if that's your next question, but I just want to sort of address that. If I want us to compare, the big difference between India and China is China was a digital first economy. E-commerce is very well developed in China, even more than US. So in some sense, China was very, you can't never be prepared for it, but they were in the right zone. And so the Chinese, even during the pandemic, were saying that when it gets over, I'm going to go back. That's something Indians are not saying. So that's where our sentiments of, if I was to summarize, that's where we are.
Understood. If I were to, Soumya, just ask you a follow-up question there, right? That from a China to an India comparison perspective, how do you see that? Are there any behavioral changes which have got changed? Like you said, that e-commerce was very prevalent in China. The percentage adoption of e-commerce in China was very high as compared to where India stands. Are you seeing any newer trends emerge from a Chinese market, new behavioral changes?
In China, in fact, Siddharth, what we are seeing is the trends that were there have got intensified. So there always was a trend towards e-commerce, towards digital first, towards mobile first, mobile payments. All that has become aggravated and intensified. There's nothing that is absolutely new that has happened. That's the difference with India. In India, we found about 20% buying for the first time online. So in India, probably there are changes which are going to be much more first time than in China, which was anyway more prepared in that sense in this ecosystem. The other thing I want to call out for India is also the fact that we have lived in an era of scarcity. It's only in the 90s that we moved out and moved into an era of choices. So in somewhere deep in our heart, consumers fear spending. They want to go back to saving more and more. So they do want to go back to that era. And that is something that's not there in other parts of the world to the extent that's there in India and probably some other Asian countries. That's a big, big watch out, because many brands are built on aspiration. Much of advertising is built on desire. So how to get that back is going to be the single biggest sort of challenge that we'll be facing.
Sumit, taking a cue from that, from what Soumya spoke about, that our consumers are very much different, and the whole aspirational economy just got created over the last 10 to 20 years. Digital has been one of the biggest, I would say, aspirational medium for a lot of the people. With these changing times and with these changing sentiments, right? Can you give examples of, what are the opportunities, right? She spoke about the community being at center. We look at, newer narratives or people's priorities changing, let that be saving behavior, etc. How do you look at, from a brand standpoint, what are the new opportunities which are coming out? Comparative, keeping in mind that we have longer consumer attention span available with television time, dwell time increasing, digital content time increasing. How should a brand really look at this from an opportunistic landscape? Sumit, you need to unmute. You're still on mute.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Just saying, Harish opened his session with a beautiful line that all times can be seen and looked at with inspiration. So my personal view on this is
Sumit, you're buffering. Would you like to just switch off your video and just go audio? That's fine with us. Sorry, now I'm really feeling I'm in a conference where we have some bit of technical glitches happening. That makes me feel.
I know.
Sorry, Shani. Not
okay.
We have Sumit.
Am I back on?
Yes, Sumit, you're on. Please, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Doesn't happen again. But anyways, as you said, it's something we have to live with. Yeah. So let's look at it. So my view is that it's time to be sensitive. Let's not just leverage the opportunity for the moment. While there are some brands, and Soumya, just shared with us some sectors and some brands that should leverage the market opportunity. And I think they're doing a wonderful job, because whether we look at delivery, we look at food, we look at personal hygiene brands, we look at sanitizers, some of them are investing some bit of their budgets in actually not direct and promotional communication, but actually communication that is useful to human beings. So I think this whole aspect of looking at your target first as a human in these times is most important. We're all going through something that I think the world has never seen, lockdowns to this extent happening globally. So our lives are we can see a lot of brands. I saw a beautiful campaign digital by Fevicol, and maybe it's gone on ATL. I'm not too aware on social distancing and how it's very important to have social distancing now to actually conserve and make stronger ties future. We can see Godrej and other brands like Dabur do some very good responsible messaging. And also use it. I think a lot of brands are doing it very well because they're using a very good mix of both ATL, which is primarily TV and OTT, because as you said, viewership has gone through the roof. And secondly, digital. So I think it's time to be sensitive. We should all, as brand custodians, once just step back and think, what is it that we want to say, and what is it that we want to say publicly? Because as brands, we don't all have to necessarily just go and make out public statements, create new communication with agencies quickly. Everybody is doing a situation which calls for it. We all have clients, we all have consumers, and it's important to be transparent and communicate with them. For example, some of the things that we have done is that assured that we are there. But at the same time, we need to be sensitive that everybody is receiving so much of information, whether it's through WhatsApp groups, in our inboxes. So let's be cautious and sensitive to what is it that we're saying. Let's think of our process, if there are delays, etc., that are going to happen, because those are the things I think we should be saying. So think about it and then use the opportunity and think of everybody as you, is what I kind of feel in these times is important.
And Sumit, just to try to divide the timeline, let's say between the two timelines, which is the next 90 days or 100 days versus how the things look up over the next 12 months to 15 months. What would be your advice? While I completely agree with you, right now it's a very emotional time for a lot of the people, for a lot of the consumers, and brands just going out there, just promoting their product may be coming out to be a lot more insensitive in these testing times. But what would be your advice? That of course one can take that from a next 90-day standpoint, but from a little longer perspective, what should be the staggered exit of the lockdown, as we talk about in the narrative in the news? What should be the exit of the lockdown for brands?
Well, the answer, I really don't, because I think one thing we're all sure of is the uncertainty. But also one thing that, and a lot of positive come out of every challenging situation. So for example, I'm sure a little bit more capacity now to think and do some of the things that we've always wanted to, but they've never maybe been very, very right. We're all working. There's so many new things we're discovering. Look at this new way of interacting. This might become a new way, to do meetings. So I think it's time to kind of build multiple plans. What if this happens? What if that happens? I wish I had a straight answer. I don't know, because we don't know what the future make the most of it as a company, for investing more in our product and design and saying, let's not let this lockdown or this situation derail us from some of the things that are going to enhance our product, etc. We're all engaging more with our teams, and similarly, we should not forget our clients and our consumers, so let's continue to engage with them. And I'm sure some interesting business models, Siddharth, might kind of come up. It was the slowdown of 2008, 2009 that suddenly played a very big role in the adoption of digital advertising in this country like India. A lot of people actually moved on to advertising at that time. So we'll all have to wait and see. But let's not waste time and be able and nimble, I think, in these times.
Yeah, completely agreed. These are the times to do all our A/B test. I think Soumya made an important point about thinking of it like a lab. But
yes.
All A/B test dreams can come true. Babita, you had a point to make there?
Yes, thanks, Sumit. So I'm just building on to the exit point that you made, the exit strategy, and what Sumit said. Along with solidarity, which is huge today, there is also a lurking sense of distrust which is building. And we see that, for example, starting with the kind of news that we read. We don't know what to trust. We look at our neighbors with suspicion as well as love. Suspicion when somebody is walking out, maybe for a valid reason, but to say, oh my God, is that now going to happen? Or will it happen to me? So this kind of distrust is not something where when you live with this for weeks, and now it's going to be close to 6 weeks now, it's an emotion which is very difficult to get out of. So I feel that any brand that has a strategy post-COVID on attentiveness, on a lot of care and a lot of honesty in what I have to give to you as a brand should score a little higher with consumers. Because always as brands, we've always kept the brand promise at the heart and then looked at what are the kind of emotions and insights that we can tap into. I think now, because the emotions have become very global, brands could work on it the other way around, as in look at what are the pervading emotions and how can I have an answer to that with what I have as an offer or a solution and not just a message. That's my take on this.
Sure, I think so. That's a very important point, especially from a post-exit period. That going back to the basics on what is a real value proposition of the brand and relating it back to the consumer, reminding them. I think so that definitely is an important point there. But my next question is to you, and it's more from a we all spoke about the new normal behavior which has changed. Shine, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, we have seen the whole new normal, which is impacting the behavioral change for the consumers. Suddenly, I think so April and May was all going to be about IPL. Every single brands would have been trying to present on cricket. Everyone is in a state where no one knows where should I be investing, where I should not be investing. We talk about prime time. I'm still coming from little old school terminologies of the television world. Digital does not have a prime time, but from a prime time perspective, again, the definition of prime time has really shifted and really changed. I would say family viewing is back in a lot of the homes. We hear about the great TRP numbers coming for Ramayana, Mahabharata. A very different scenario is changing. How does that, what kind of pressures it puts? Because, uncertainties are there, both from a 90-day standpoint and from a 12-month perspective. How brands should be looking at the new normal from a media allocation standpoint? Because I think that's going to be a big shift for a lot of the brands, right?
That's correct, Siddharth. So I'll just try and put a bit of a context here and then really come to attempt answering the question. The first context is always the consumer and people. And I spoke a little bit about the distrust. So what are people like us and across the world and in India really watching and consuming now, whether it's online or whether it's what we call traditional media, which is TV, etc. And from a group company research, I'd come across 3 things which really struck me as being very real. That is, consumers are now consuming content for primarily 3 reasons. One is to cope. I need to cope, and therefore I'm looking for solutions around. Second is to adapt. How do I adapt myself to what this looks like a new normal, at least for an indefinite period? Whether it continues or not as a new normal, we don't know. So how do I adapt myself? And the third is, how do I connect? Because this is a time when I'm sitting inside my house, locked in. How do I connect, starting from immediate family to friends and the circle goes on widening, widening. So you have cope, adapt, and connect as primary behaviors. That's the consumer context. The media context, what you mentioned, prime time has totally been redefined. In fact, it is any time where the families or any content consumption is happening, and in this case, TVC, because that's where we talk about prime time, is prime time now. As genres, from what I have read, news and, news primarily, and of course, entertainment are key genres. We've seen DD, they've even launched a new channel called DD Retro, the content consumption there. OTT is on a high, and we've got, again, evidence to prove that. Gaming seems to be one of the new emergence, much more than before when it comes to, again, what people are engaged in, and as a media channel as well. The third is, if you look at the brand and the media relationship, the basic thumb rule that most of us have followed is saliency. That whatever said and done, it is very important for a brand to be salient, to not just vanish if something happens because you tend to drop from mind space. Now, if I put all these three together, there are some categories that find being on even media like television, where the viewership is going up to almost doubling, I think, or as high as 43%, 44%. They find it relevant to be there because it is very contextual and relevant today. But there are some other categories where going onto traditional media would be very expensive and would not make sense given the kind of relationship I have with the category. For example, if it's a high value investment, for instance, where I may look at messaging now, but by the time I get into any matrices which the brand wants me to react to, which is either consideration or check something out or go out and check something, I'm not able to do that. So for the brand, the ROI or the matrices that are currently being used are almost negative. So the brand may choose to be salient by going off traditional media, or we all know what traditional media is, and focus more on digital, because digital allows you also to sharpshoot. It allows you tailored messaging. It allows you to be relevant to your consumers, your loyalists, and your cohorts. I've had examples where brands are engaging with loyalists over videos. You know, there are one-to-one communications happening with huge cohorts. And so the brand is salient, but you don't see it on the media that we are used to seeing it. So I think a balance of saliency in the way that is not eating into the resources I need to conserve today are very, very critical as a decision. The last thing on IPL that you mentioned, we don't know. It's been postponed indefinitely, right? So yes, that's really the toss-up. You know, if there are savings, do I keep it to be ready to be, you know, as someone said yesterday in an interview, to be ready to be fit and agile so that I can sprint once the lockdown is over? Or do I sort of use a bit of it to be there in the mind space? Is a call that different brands will have to take.
I think that's a very important point, and I think that's the question which most of the marketers are trying to address, and a lot of the business is trying to address. That are these the times where we should be looking at? In the funded world, we talk about increasing runway for our businesses, yes, or we talk about, you know, ensuring that there's enough capital available for the better times when they come, so that you're able to pound and are able to increase your share of market. With that, I'd like to go to my next question, and next question that's for Soumya. Soumya, so, you know, we have seen that, and I'm sure you must be tracking that over the last 30 to 45 days, we have seen that a lot of the brands, their reaction has been to just go off air, go black. And it's a very natural reaction for a lot of the marketers, because Soumya, we see that people are not very comfortable with the uncertainties which are there. Or answering that question, or should we be saving money, or should we be taking this as an opportunity? Can you share, let's say, you know, from your experience, what do you feel, where do you bend towards how the narrative should be in a digital first world, number one, and number two, what are the experiences from maybe other markets, from other past experiences of the 2008, 2009 global recession, SARS, on what brands have been able to take these moments as a moment of advantages and positively impact their business?
Yeah, Siddharth. In fact, I mean, as you rightly said, this is the time when a lot of brands are holding back. And I read this somewhere, I don't recall who said this, but consumers can hide, but brands cannot hide. And that's exact opposite that brands are doing. They're simply hiding away. And that is probably coming from, I would say, a misplaced view that consumers are right now not receptive to what brands want to say. Yeah, they are not as consumers, but they are, as Sumit was saying, as human beings. And they will remember brands which did something or said something at a time when they had the time to sit and listen to brands. What our experience tells us is that, one, Babita has already touched upon the fact that salience is in fact the single biggest pillar of equity. For almost, actually most categories, especially categories in the more commoditized or packaged categories. Yes, in categories like automotive, you know, in the more higher purchase categories, you could stay away for some time. but not in your regular day-to-day kind of categories. In fact, if I remember right, it's about 40% plus is the contribution of salience to what we call brand part. That's the single largest contribution. What we have found, we have analyzed something close to 300 brands in the Brandzy database. And we found that brands which went dark, completely dark, versus brands that either remained flat or did a marginal increase in their spends, the KPIs crashed much more in the same period of a slowdown for brands that went completely dark. So, and that's the lesson we have, in fact, from the global financial crisis, that you need to maintain some degree of messaging with the consumer. Now, whether you maintain it through TV or whether you do it using digital smartly. In fact, Nike Play Inside, which has got absolutely great feedback from consumers, including the fact that they made a lot of content free. They made the health and the fitness content free. So if we can have more integrated, holistic messaging online, where possible, that's a way out. There is a coming back of nostalgia. There's a coming back of authenticity, and as Babita was saying, trust. So running some of your old advertising, which is what Amul is doing, is not a bad idea, especially in India, which is watching Mahabharata, watching Ramayana, for sure. So there are three things that are required right now. The consumer or the human being is seeking comfort, is seeking connectivity, and is seeking to, in some way, feel that they're a part of a greater purpose. If in some way, as a brand, you can message that while remaining salient, that will help a lot, when the lockdown and when things become a little better. One thing I do want to say, Siddharth, is that there is an assumption that there is a normal that is going to happen. There may not be a normal. This may be the normal. We may get into an era of opening up, closing down. We may get into an era of permanent social distancing of some degree. We may get into an era of wearing masks at all times. So that normal that we knew 1 month back is not going to come back. So if you are planning and preparing and waiting for that normal, please don't. Yes, it is a challenge when you're not available on the shelf, whether I should advertise and create desire. But advertising's role should not be short term. There is a long term role, and never, I think we have moved over the last few years to a very ROI, ROI driven way, performance marketing, right? That's the word for it. When I started my career, advertising was about building brands. And as insights industry, whenever we do brand tracking and we go back and do a presentation, that's what we keep saying. You can't question every quarter, every thing, every penny you're spending, what it is doing. There is a long term, and never than today should you go back to those basics of building a long-term sustainable brand. I think that's what my view and Kantar's view would be on this.
Certainly. And I think so, there was a point which was made by Sumit as well, right? And, they run, they are the largest Indian internet company. Is that times like these, two things will happen, right? Digital advertising, it's not only about at what cost are we able to reach people out there, but it's more importantly that how can you also use digital to create new products, and how you're able to balance those new business models, new products, and connecting with the consumer. I think so that's fairly important. And yes, 100% with you on that from an advertising standpoint, going black, going off air completely, not being present and being communicative, I think that's one big disaster. We have seen that in 2008, 2009. Of course, the younger generation of marketers will now be experiencing it and seeing their own set of case studies. But I'm hoping that this panel's inputs will drive better insights which they can take to their marketer. Sumit, my next question goes to you. And as a marketer, right? How do you? Shine, can you do the next slide, please? So I think so one of the biggest challenge, which we face, right? Any marketer face today is, again, it's about building a perspective for where the world is going, but more importantly, having a perspective of where do we stand today. How should the marketer be reconfiguring the dashboard, right? What are the key metrics inside, both internally and externally, they should be really looking at to define their own brand strategy?
Siddharth, we're luckily in a place where most of our products are online, if, for example, in Naukri, we were just still communicating and counting the number of jobs and CVs that are coming every day, it would obviously be very wrong, right? Because it's not going to be as it was a month ago. So while I think we're all in that era of where we are still iterating the new metrics really, but there are certain things that, at least for brands which are digital, because there's so much of data that is available that you can look at that data and start seeing what is really happening. So, for example, we can see that there are still interviews being happened, there are still CVs being shortlisted, coming, but they're coming to a different set of jobs, right? So what is really happening, right? So I think in most businesses, at least businesses that are online, there is some kind of activity happening in non-retail businesses. What is that? And therefore try and actually evolve metrics around that. The other thing that using time for is there are so many things in your products which maybe you haven't had enough time to communicate about. You do a new innovation, TM, and then something new. Right? So are you going to use this opportunity to see how you can train people better, how you can ask people who are using how to use different things that will be helpful to them, keep activities and the time in mind. For example, in Naukri, we are kind of saying, okay, why don't you kind of resume today? And some of these things were all paid. But you're saying, no, this is the time where people are at home, where there is anxiety, like when Soumya started, she said, the consumer is anxious today. What are some of the things that we can start looking at and seeing? We're kind of seeing in our business like Jeevan Sathi, video profiles are increasing, right? Because people are at home, there's somebody to record your video, you've got more time. So I think that's what most of us are doing and preparing on. So what are the other things rather than just direct metrics? And some of us seeing are in businesses where direct metrics also make a lot of sense. So some businesses in education, etc., are far more less impacted than other businesses where there's nothing happening. So it's definitely look at. But at the same time, you need to keep an eye on what's happening. So business, let's say, not the short term, we need to build for the long term. So I would say that some new metrics will keep evolving. It's going to be different for different businesses. At the same time, what is really happening in the core is also important to see. So having a plan B and having various scenarios of plan B, because we don't know how it's going to end up. But being sure, as Soumya just beautifully explain how it's for the long term that we are all in business. It's not doomsday, and it's not that business will end and humanity is coming to an end tomorrow. So it'll keep evolving, I think.
Sorry. So I think so. The most important point, which I think Soumya also made, and Sumi just taking from what you're speaking about, that it's very important that looking both inwards and outwards at the same time is important. That your own internal metrics from a dashboard standpoint, I think so, with your brand value proposition remaining core, if you're able to just marry them back to the impact it drives to your business, I think so that will still remain very materially important. And having of course, advertising should not be about every 30 days ROI. Of course, business moves in shorter cycles, longer cycles. There should be guiding metrics in short term, but yeah, everything should be built for more long-term value creation. From that, Babita, I'd like to come to you and have a more sharper pitch, right? Talking to the CFO, right? Having that hard talk, that how do I really convince, as a marketer, that all on this panel, we all believe that advertising should be on. We also believe that advertising is more about having a long-term business impact. But today, getting in front of the CFO more than the CEO, because CFOs have now become in the controlling seats. Every 10 days situation changes. What is that pitch I should really take to the CFO? What metrics should I really talk about to them? And really show them that, hey guys, this is where the value can get created over the next 12 months.
Yeah, not an easy conversation. I have a lot of respect for CFOs. It's not an easy conversation. I would also like to, I was looking at some of the questions and I would like to mention, so Vikram questioned on the H1 numbers of the industry, which is, according to a lot of sources, and we know that there are many sources. So he asked about what is a number which is the hit number, honestly, and I don't have that number, but we all know that, the first quarter has been muted to a great extent. Because overall it has come down, the spends have come down. Tathagata had a question on low involvement categories and what happens, when it comes to spending and demand. And Shubayu had a very interesting question on if everything is running dry, consumers are not opening up, they don't have an option to shop, factories are not working, does it even justify an ROI to spend? So I think I'll try to cover all of these three and talk to an imaginary CFO.
Sure.
The first thing, I think we cannot deny the fact, and rightly so, that almost all businesses or most businesses that are not relevant now in terms of consumer usage and consumption are going through a very, very strong cash crunch, liquidity crunch. And it's not easy to run a business when the cash flow runs dry or nearly dry, which means immediate conservation of resources. So that's the first thing. So resources are much tighter and brands are therefore, and marketers are very cautious and conservative when it is coming to questioning how much should we spend on advertising against the plan that we had for Q1 and getting into Q2. That's number one. So there is a lot of cautiousness and conservativeness. So the argument for loosening that conservativeness, if I may say so, can only be to a certain extent. I don't think as a person who's a partner to, a brand team, we can go back and say, you know what, things are going to be normal if you just continue as before, or even if you spend half as before, because some way you'll get the return. It's a correct argument, but it is an argument where at this point in time may not have much takers for one reason, and that is because of the uncertainty to the end term. We don't know when it's going to end. And because of that, this cautiousness has increased. So the argument would really be about what would be the two scenarios of if I go completely silent and zero spends versus if I spend an X amount and what return will I get out of it? And I'll just use the word return and not really ROI now, and I'm parking ROI for a minute. The example I gave you of digital and the ability of digital to actually have very tailored, customized messages and sharpshoot it to people who really need those messages and who can keep your business going is available at spends which are far more conservative compared to traditional media or mass media. And therefore, one of the convincing is, can I relook at the plans that I have and really explore what are some of these new ways in which I can keep some conversation going, some relevance going, where I've actually shown my prudence when it comes to conservation of resources, but I've also kept the brand and the brand going in mind. So to Tathagata's question on a low involvement category, I honestly would really question spending beyond the point, but I would keep this going on social media, on digital, on media that I own to say that, this is what this time is about, relevant, communication on, like I said, coping, adapting, and connecting. The other would be, and again, this was an interview I listened to yesterday, and it was remarkable, where the very senior person made this point about don't mortgage your long term for the short term. And I think it's a very, very valid point, which is a lot of expenses, so to say, or a lot of budgets are also allocated for planning now and for gearing up for the opening. That's also an expense, you know. So while factories are closed, but there are offices that are open. For example, there are people that are working, there are partners that are working, and all of this is, I think somebody in the panel also made a point, I think it was Sumit, that there has never been so much of time for key stakeholders or everyone in an organization to think about the brand, to think about innovation, to think about solutions, to think about what is it that we didn't really examine in either our process, our production, the kind of innovations that we can have, both short-term and long-term, and can we sort of invest in that now? So if we do this scenario of what are really the expenditures or the expenses that I need to retain so that I'm fit for when business starts again, and so that I'm salient enough to keep the brand going, I think that would be enough. I totally wouldn't recommend any conversation with a CFO to say, this is a time where we can really build brands by being very relevant, unless you are relevant as a category. And we all know some categories, e.g. hand wash, e.g. essential supplies, etc., are relevant. So that would be my take, honestly.
And if I was to ask, I'm just going back to one of the questions which was asked by a panel, is that if we talk from a digital first world, right, and of course the next 90 days completely in alignment with you, that these are not the times to just rush out, and you need to have a little longer term view from a next 12 to 15 month standpoint. But if one was to look at things from a digital marketing standpoint, do you see that these are times and opportunities where marketers should be talking to the CFO about new customer acquisition, or is it about just retaining their market share? And other panelists also, this question is an open question for everyone. What's your point of view about new customer acquisition versus just trying to maintain your market share?
I think retention to me, and I was part of another panel where we had a conversation around this, and my POV is totally on retention for a couple of reasons. Number one, retention comes at a much lower cost compared to new customer acquisition. And we are talking about a time where resources are constrained, and therefore we are making judicious use of resources. Second, the convincing or the communication or the messaging that you need to do for retention is easier relatively and simpler compared to new business acquisition, because you have to start the argument from ground zero. And a lot of people, given the current mindset, may not be in the position to listen to any sales pitch which is new if it is not within the three things of cope, adapt, and connect, or any word which you may use, which is this. So I feel while you have saliency going on in digital or in a way that you can use your resources best, retention to me, especially the categories that have a strong, loyal customer base, should really focus on that, not just now, but even immediately after you're getting out of it. And just get some ground before. Loyal as a word, or loyalist, means that, they mean that people have stood by you during difficult times. And those are the people that will help you grow.
So yeah, I think so. With that, retention marketing being an important pillar, that's something which marketers can take back to the CFO, that retention marketing is important, and advertising can definitely contribute a lot in retention marketing. Soumya, do you have a point to make there?
I was just going to absolutely agree with Babita completely on this. Firstly, because it's even for mass marketed brands. This is the moment when consumers are actually probably down trading or switching brands because they are not available on the shelves. So this is the time when that brand of atta is being bought, which you normally don't buy. So it is important to talk to your loyalists right now. It is important to reinforce your brand to them, so that, the leaky bucket is going to be disastrously leaky when the world opens up. So I completely agree with Babita on this.
Great. So with that, I think so that's pretty much from the panel out here. Shiny, how are we on the time check, and would you want us to take any questions?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful session. Very insightful. We've also been tweeting a little bit about this. And I have some questions. You can also see the questions on the chat, but I have a few questions that we picked up from the people. So Vikram Singh asks, I read from press that ad industry would be down by 5,000 crores rupees INR in Q1. Where do you think the ad industry deficit is heading in H1?
I think Vikram also mentioned my name, and that's why I tried to respond to that by saying, I honestly don't have one figure. There are numbers which are floating around, and we are not. All I can say is we are hoping as an industry for speedy recovery, definitely in H2, God willing, and things going well. Just riding on the fact that we are a young country and we are an optimistic country. And if I just put these two values, we are hoping that the curve that we exit out of would not be an L or anything else but a V. And that's the answer I have for now. If anybody else has a number, I'm happy to, but I don't. Sorry, Vikram.
Young and optimistic, I like that.
Thank you.
We shouldn't be talking about numbers. I think so everyone knows that definitely the impact is going to be much higher in H1. And the larger categories like travel and hospitality, which has taken a much larger battering, and they contribute a very significant percentage, as high up to, I think so 14% of the overall spending which happens. So I think so for sure, those numbers, 5,000 crores or whatever that number is, does sound reasonable at this stage. But yeah, I don't think so anyone should be putting out numbers. But yeah, I'm with Babita on this. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, that's a nice sign.
So the next question that we have is from Charmi Agarwal, who says, how can brands market themselves to increase spending, or should they wait and watch? Should they take a wait and watch approach? Should they increase spending? What should they really be doing maybe right after this ends or right now?
I think so. Babita had answered that quite in detail in the last question. It's all about retention marketing. And I think so Soumya made that point that you can't switch off to a large extent. So one needs to find a balance in that. It's not about going gung-ho and agnostic that, hey, I don't care what's happening on the macro and I just need to keep building my brand. I think so one needs to find a balance between advertising and Babita's point around retention marketing. I think so that's how they will be able to keep the CXOs happy.
So if we just add one thing about, we need to be sure what is the shape. There's a lot of questions I'm seeing, what will happen in the education industry? There was something on construction. So it depends on the shape of demand that you think is going to happen. If the shape of demand is something that you see is like going to happen immediately, then obviously you need to be in some form on even at this moment. And for daily essentials, most of FMCG, that's what one would say. If the shape of demand, let's say automotive, is going to take a little bit of time, but you were anyway not doing too well earlier. So I mean, if you have to sustain yourself, you have to come back, then you need to plan for something that's going to happen right after the lockdown, maybe lockdown ends. First thing we need to be clear, what is the shape of this new normal for our industry? I think if everybody can spend their respective free time or whatever time this time is giving us to work that out, including for advertising and for us as insights industry, it is really going to help all of us.
Yeah,
I just want, oh, sorry. No, Babita, you go on.
Yeah, so no, just Soumya, you're so right on the demand thing that, sparking demand would be a big challenge for marketing as well. So some categories would have a natural demand and some would have a slack demand, and maybe it could lead to some kind of collaborations that we've not seen before ever, where maybe categories come together to generate demand for the category first and then go on to their individual brand differences. Maybe it's a collective first and that later. I'm just trying to think of what are the new ways in which we could even work in terms of, but spurring demand would be the first point for getting anything going, any wheels going.
I just wanted to add, because I kind of saw a few questions on education, and then I saw a question on what should consulting companies do. And we've got an education business, and we're seeing this all around. For example, yesterday I got a mailer from Harvard saying how they've actually put 62 courses free, online. So I think it's an opportunity also for brands to kind of see what is it that you can give back. And we've seen a lot of my team members and people around are thanking Cult for making a lot of videos free, and they're being able to do a lot of fitness at home now, right? So they've nicely thought of it because it's basic, yeah. So while there will be people who are really into fitness and they might find those videos not very, very useful because they are at advanced levels of training, but Cult has thought about the larger audiences and is doing stuff like this. So I think it's a time where both from a retention as well as, there are questions on customer acquisition. Strategies like this also help you acquire more customers once things go back. These are intelligent strategies which are not being done today with a selfish motive. But these things help, So we, for example, in Naukri and in 99 Acres, because we're online, we have a lot of data, and a lot of people are wanting to know what's going to happen to prices. Are properties going to get cheaper? Should we wait more? We've got databases because people register with us. So we're taking out reports on jobs, on trends, both some which we make public and some which you kind of share with segments of consumers that that this is going to be useful to. So as a consulting company, even kind of trying to get all the insights and putting it together as trends and insights and serving it to your consumers, I think today is a big service, because everybody wants to know, what is going to happen in the future, because unfortunately there is a lot of uncertainty, So I think that's an opportunity which some of our businesses can think of latching on to. And that will help in retention and in remaining salient as well. And that doesn't require advertising dollars, Thanks.
Thank you, Sumit. I think we've had a wonderful session and a wonderful panel and answered a lot of burning questions, actually.